Hello everyone, Gaurav will join shortly after 5 to 10 minutes. Thank you. Hello everyone. Gaurav will join in 2 to 3 minutes because he is having some technical issue. Hello everyone. Gorak is not joining today. He have some uh, personal issues. So our backup trainer Nitish is joining in 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Nitish.
Hello, hello. Are we good to start?
Hey Nitish. Yeah, sure.
Am I audible? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
1 second. Okay. 1 second. Oh my God. Oh, I need to quit and I'll join right back. Give me a second. I can't share my screen without doing so. 1 second. Okay. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So how are you guys doing? This session is going to be more or less like an Q&A. Like if you guys have any questions, anything else, and then I'm also going to, I was thinking maybe I would go through some topics like just in general, just questions about the how the questions are asked in the interview, what kind of question I was asked when I was doing the interview, or like kind of give you that expectations on what to expect whenever you walk into an interview or something similar, all related to being a React developer. So before that, like I'll just like to ask, like if you guys have any confusion, any questions regarding React or anything that you did, any certain topics. So I think this would be the good time to ask that, because like we are kind of you guys are currently building projects with Gorak. So like I'm here like just to like for today for this session. So we'll just go through like basically Q&A. If you have any questions regarding JavaScript, HTML, CSS, React, this is the good time to basically ask. So this might be something if you want to revisit any topic or anything in general. So like, how are you guys doing so far with React, with HTML, CSS, JavaScript? Like, are you guys getting the concepts? Are you guys like, when you are building projects, do you understand the code that you are writing? Anyone? Or if you guys don't have any questions, that means I would just assume that you guys know what you are doing until now. Like whatever you code, you guys have pretty good idea about React and coding in general. So
So Nitish, about the classes or learnings that we have done until now, it's basically for me, like personally, it's uh, 85% is new thing to me. So I'm just trying to get how it works, and then all the terms and how uh, the channels
yeah.
and networkings, how they are doing and all. So basically it's all learning, not like
Yeah.
learn phase. So we
Yeah, I
cannot
get it.
make
Like,
any, yeah, I
yeah,
cannot
I get
say
it. Like
anything about like that. Yeah.
I can't expect you to know everything, but until now, whatever you have learned, are you guys pretty confident about it? For example, let's talk about uh, React hooks, right? You guys are are you guys very comfortable using React hooks from now on? Or like if you just go to GitHub and see somebody else React code, are you guys like kind of confident to like make sense what that code is doing, or anything in general? For example, let's say I go to this website, right? So he has lots of repo. Like if you just casually browse it, you'll find something that is related to React, right? Not just this person in particular, but like anyone. So like I just want you to be comfortable, like when you see React code, like you guys need to be like kind of familiar with what's going on. So because that is the basic expectation whenever you start to work, right? Whenever you see React code, although you don't understand any of it, but when you see use effect or use state or even use memo, like you guys need to be like, are you guys confident? Okay, hey, this is React hook, this is doing this. So kind of trying to connect that dots.
Uh, yeah, overall, I can see the big picture, but like the basics, and then like the internal wiring and all that is still not there. I haven't reached there. So yes, it's I think at the end of this project, and like at the end of this bootcamp, somehow I can answer you more positively.
Yeah, I do expect that. Like
Yeah.
like I even I'm learning, right? So I don't know so many things. So whenever I'm writing some hooks, there might be some complex logic that I have to use. So I always refer back to documentation, or like go into some website, Stack Overflow, Google, and then I kind of try it to make sense, and then that's like how I go on like solving the problems, right? But at the end of the day, you are a React developer, but like that doesn't mean you need to know all the ins and out of React, but it's more like how do you solve a problem that is specific to React, right? By using React. So React is just a technology. So you can like, it can be anything, React, Angular, Vue, but like at the end of the day, it's about how you solve that problem. So um, just in general, like as a React developer, like as a developer, as a front-end developer, what I want you to know is like, hey, like it's all about solving problems. Like doesn't matter which technology you use. We are in this context, we are using React, but like we are kind of solving problems that comes up. Might be anything, like somebody gives you a design, you have to solve that problem, right, to build that design. So it's all about solving problems. So you guys would be pretty comfortable, but the basic terms, when you see hooks or you see memo, you see context, you see providers, like at least like I want you to be like familiar. Okay, hey, like I studied about it. It does these things. So that is how you connect the dots, and that is how you understand a code base. Because first, when I jumped into a project, the code base was used, right? I didn't understand it. It took me like almost a month just to understand what's happening in the code base. But like once you know these terms, like it will be much easier for you to connect those dots and kind of the code base to make sense. Because every company, every project is different, and they are doing things on their own terms, right? They have their own guidelines, they have their own styles of writing code. So yeah, like I just want to make sure that you guys, whenever you see a React code, whenever you see those React terms like hooks, or even class components like states, contexts, providers, let's say actions, reducers. Like I just want you guys to feel like comfortable that you know these terms, you have heard these terms, and then you'll be able to comfortably solve that problem. So if you guys have any specific topic, we can jump on that topic. Otherwise, I will go through some of the questions that I've encountered during an interview. I have another technical interview tomorrow, actually. I can give you like kind of an overview, or like my thought process on few of the questions, or anything in general. So.
Oh yeah, that should be very helpful, Nitish. Yeah, and also, if it's okay, can you please share this questionnaire also?
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Okay, so if everybody is okay with moving on to that part, I can go ahead. There's one repo that I specifically want you guys to like bookmark, which is called the interview questions by Sudris, which is 1 second. Yeah, Sudris. So this repository is like, I'd say this is the bread and butter of your interview questions in React, right? Anything related to React, any questions, everything is here. I'll share this on the chat. So I'll share this on the chat. Just bookmark it, go through it once. Like I go through this like almost once a week, right? Just to refresh my memory. This is a list of like more than 500 questions all about React. And then whenever I walk into an interview, the questions, like it can be any questions, but it is like related, like coming from this sets of questions. There are so many questions in general that is repeated all the time, but like this is like when you say React, once you are familiar with this set of questions, it has about React router, React lifecycles, testing, like React native, which is for mobile. It is similar once you know React Native is just React, but you write for mobile apps, but you don't have to look into React Native. It also will go through hooks, arrays, lazy function, memo functions, anything in general. So this is a good resource that I always use whenever I go to an interview. So like tomorrow I have an interview. Today, like I'm looking at this sets of questions because like 99% of the time the question is going to be very generic, and they are going to use this resource to ask you questions.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and this question, they have answers to all of them. If you just click what is React, takes you to the answers, questions and answers, gives you examples on what is it talking about, right? And then it also gives you differences, all of the things like with examples. So this is a very good resource whenever you are preparing for your React interview. It also has more than 26,000 stars. That means people are actively using it all the time, right? So I'll go into a few questions that I was asked previously. This one was, I'll just try to give you some examples, and then you guys can see the patterns of how these questions are asked. This was for Southwest. I did an interview. I was in the third round, which was a technical interview. So basically, the first question that I was asked was, what version of React did you use, right? What version of React are you familiar with, right? So do you guys know what version of React are you currently using? Do you guys have any idea which version of React are you guys using?
16 or 17?
You guys are, if you are using Create React App, then currently the latest version is 18, version 18. But if you are using a specific certain version, then that's going to be 17 or 16. But like if you are just using, hey, Create React App, and then you just give your folder name or the project name, it's going to be automatically built in React 18. So React 18 is the latest one, and they have updated it to React 18. So whenever I was interviewing, React 18 wasn't out yet, so I was using React 17. But right now, React 18, you guys are using React 18. Whenever you use Vite or whenever you use npx, Create React App, it automatically builds React 18. Pretty general. They just want you to know, like, are you familiar with the technology? Are you keeping updated with the technology? They're just trying to know, like, how updated are you in these kind of questions. But again, what's the differences between a functional and a class components? Like, although you guys might not have written much of a class components, the code you are going to be working on in the future, of course, will have some sort of class components. Might not be 100% functional component, but there will be some sort of class components, because for a company, few employees, like maybe 3-4 years ago, they have written some components and they are still using that component. So that can be in class component. So they kind of expect you to know at least that you are familiar with class components. Can you guys, like, do you guys know the difference between functional and class components? This is a React basic question, right? So these questions are going to be asked by a recruiter, not by a tech lead, or like not by another engineer. Basically, some recruiter is going to ask you this sort of question, because these are very generic basic React questions. So when they are screening you, they will be asking some simple questions like this. Also, they will ask you like, hey, what do you prefer? Like, do you prefer functional component or class component? And then why, right? The other most important question is like, always, like every interview I've walked in, this question is included. This question comes up every single time. What are the different lifecycle method of a React component? If I have tomorrow, I have a 5th round, which is the final round of interview with a client. And then I am expecting to be asked this question, because all of the 4 round I have been, they asked me this question: what are the different lifecycle methods of a React component? Like, can you explain me about different lifecycle methods that are on a React component? I guess you guys are well aware about this, right? You guys know what are the different lifecycle methods of a React component, right?
Yeah, mounting,
Visualization,
unmounting.
Mounting, updating, unmounting, right? So if you like, sometimes they might ask like, see, they might ask you to explain a little bit in depth. So in that case, you can refer to some diagrams like this, where like mounting means basically wherever we are setting a state, right? Whenever we are giving it a variable, like, hey, like our initial value is going to be this, so that is basically where we mount our component, right? Updating is like whenever we change that state, right? We are using set state, use state, and then whenever we are calling that function to update that state, that is going to be updating, right? So whenever we are doing a render can also come under updating, because whenever we update, it re-renders, right? So it's updating. But render can also be mounting, because when you initially mount, it has to render something, right? So go like look into like a little bit in detail about the lifecycle methods, and just be aware that, hey, like whenever we use class components, we had something like constructor, but in functional component, there is no more constructor. That means this is state, right? This is like, it can be use state, initial value, because in class component, we use constructor to give them initial state or initial value. And then also about props, updating set state, we use props. Props can change the state because props are a variable. Whenever a prop changes, it can re-render, right? Set state, whenever we change our state, our component re-renders. So re-rendering means updating, right? Force update, whenever we want to force update. For example, we have a use effect function, we have some dependency, and that dependency is going to force our component to re-render, right? So that can be included inside of updating. And then we have something called unmounting, which is like at the end of the life cycle, where the React, the life cycle of an application basically ends. So you can basically go into a little bit more detail, like showing them, like telling them difference between functional component and class components. But like, this is one of the most important question that is asked in every single React interview when you walk in. Like, if you walk into a React interview and if you don't expect this question to be asked, that's never going to happen, right?
Was unmounting. Unmounting is like a completion Like
Yeah, it's
just
basically
building
right.
app.
Yeah, our app, the lifecycle of the app has ended, right? That's unmounting. For example, you open facebook.com. Facebook.com is a React application. Now, when you close that facebook.com, it has unmounted. Like you are completely out of that application, right? You have closed that application. It kind of means like, hey, the life cycle has ended. There's no more life cycle. So
There
that
should be
basically,
some process to in, right? Like this is
yes.
the completion. So
we don't forcefully use that unmounting function all the time. In very rare cases we use unmounting functions. I haven't used it until now. Even at work nobody uses unmounting functions. Only very rare cases. For example, let's say you want to, when you eject, when you unmount a component, the lifecycle method ends. That means you have to force the refresh in order to run that lifecycle again, because it comes here once it's unmounted. That means it has stopped. Now it cannot re-render, right? Even your props is updated, it cannot re-render because the lifecycle has already ended, right? So in general, like the lifecycle is not going to end because you are going to have props, this and that. You are going to have re-render on an application. Think of it as like closing a browser, right? If I close this, the lifecycle of this page has ended, right? So if I want to come back to this page, I need to force refresh, right? I need to go to history and then go on that certain link, and it's going to reload everything again. So that is kind of like what component did unmount means. Like we don't unmount all the time. I haven't used component will unmount until now, even at work. But yeah, but in general, like it means the lifecycle has ended. The app has done its work. Now we don't need the app anymore. That is kind of where component will unmount comes.
okay, this method called a component is being removed from DOM.
Yes.
That's
we can yes, but we can also say like, hey, whenever you remove a component from a DOM, we can do it inside of updating, right? We can remove that component from the DOM if the component had some dependency, or if we have some variable that is going to remove that component from the DOM, right? But if we want to completely remove our application from the DOM, that is where we use unmounting.
Okay. Let's go to the next question.
Yeah, they'll ask you about way to pass the data in your React application. They will basically ask you, hey, how do you pass the data from one component to another component? And that's where context API might come in, right? You can say like, hey, I can use props to pass data from one component to another component, right? Or you can say, hey, we can use context API, which is given by React for us to pass data from one component to other component. You can talk about prop drilling and why context API is better than prop. And then you can also say, hey, we can use external library like Redux to pass our data from one component to another component, right? Did you guys learn about Redux?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So Redux is nothing fancy. It does the same thing like context API, but like context API, we create a provider, and then we kind of pass data from one component to another component without doing prop drilling, right? Redux does this similar thing, but in large scale. So if you have a very big application, you might use Redux. Like in my job, we didn't use Redux. We were using context API because for that application, we didn't use this library called Redux, but it's basically a way to pass data from one component to another component. It's just another library. So they'll basically ask you like, why would you use context API? This is where you talk about prop drilling, right? So why would you use context API? Why not? Why is it not recommended to only use props, right? Because if we have prop drilling, that means we have thousands of components, and we want to pass data from the first component to our 99th component. We have to pass that prop to almost 99 different components, right, to reach to that 99th level. But with context, we can remove that, and we can basically have data available to all of the component, right? It's basically like another component that has data, and then whenever we grab that component, all the component inside will get access to that data, right? We worked with context API, right? You guys are pretty comfortable with context API, right? Do you guys still have problem with context API, or like are you guys kind of good with context API?
Just to give us a concept, just a brief concept, so that we can get it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to give you an example. 1 second. I'll do it in VS Code, so that'd be easier. Okay, let's see. So we did something whenever we use context API. We did something like we named our context, right? Let's say whenever we were creating a to-do context, and then we said, hey, we want to have a context, and then we use this function called create context from React, right? This is not a React application, but I'm just going to show you the code so you can kind of remember it. We created a context, and then we created a provider, right? We created a provider, and that takes children, right? That takes children, and then this we wrap our component with this provider, right? Where we returned the provider, right? We did something like to do context the provider, and then we have a value, and then for value we give some variable, right? So this variable could be anything, right? We can say like we could say I have some extension enabled like this is TypeScript stuff, kind of helps me at work to identify what are the types. For example, right now this is a Boolean, this is any type, so don't get confused with that. It's just an extension that's working. But yeah, so we did something like value, and then let's say we have to do value, right? And to do value could be an object, right? We did hey const to do value, and then this could be an object that had like to do empty, and then we had something like next to do, like something like this value, and then we have a provider, and then we provide that value, and then we close that context and provider, right? We did something like this. Currently it's not formatted because this is not React. 1 second. I need to 1 second. This is my VS Code setting, but basically just don't look at this. This is just a highlighting that the type of this function is any. So we did something like this, and then we exported default, we exported the provider, and then we use this provider in other component, right? For example, whenever we wanted to use that context API, we did, hey, like I want to have a context. Let's say I have a to-do component. I have a to-do component. I create this arrow function, and then here I do, okay, hey, I want, let's say, yes, here I created a state, right, where I had to-do list and set to-do list, and then I used use state, and then here I provide to-do value, right? So which is going to be the initial value, right? This is going to be the initial value. To-do value, initial value, and here I can say const context value to-do list. This state is going to be my context value, and then I'm going to pass that context value throughout my application. So here, if I want to get access to this to-do list, I would basically say const to-do list, and then I would say from here, I would say use to-do context, right? I would call that use function, and then I would basically return an element that can say to-do list. The list might have anything, right? The list might have a to-do or anything. So that's how I basically use context. That's how I use provider, and that's how I pass the value, right? For example, on if I have a app component, and then I want, this is my main component to enter into my application, I would just wrap to-do context dot provider, and then this is going to be my app component, which is the entry point or the main application, and then I do to do context dot provider. 1 second, I'll close this. So now under app, I can have like 100 different components, but the value that to do context dot provider has will be accessible to these 100 different components, right? Inside of app, these 100 different components that inside of the app will now have access to any value that I pass through the context. So what is that doing? That is removing prop drilling, right? For example, I have a component 1 through 99. Let's say I have 99 components. Each component goes from one to another. So if I want to pass a value, if I have to pass a prop from one component to another, I have to pass that prop 98 times, right, to reach to 99th component. Yeah. So what is context is doing is like, hey, I create a context, I give them some value, I create the context, I give them some value, and then once I use the provider, now this, I just need to wrap a component with this provider, and then inside of that, if there is only one component, even that component has 100 different components, everything will have access to the value that is provided from our context. So we don't have to pass that prop from to 98 different components to reach the 99th component, right? So that's what context is doing. If you go back, I think you guys will probably remember we did one to-do project, right? I think I have it. 1 second.
Context API is a way to React app to effectively produce global variable that can be passed around. So you can
yes, very effective here. I think we did this. Let me see. So that is the main reason why you use context, right? That is second context public. We add components. We have child 1. We are using use context. We have providers. We have 2 different providers, data provider. And then what we are doing is on app, we are wrapping. This is prop drilling, right? First component, child component, second component, third component. We are passing data. So if I had 99 different components, I have to pass through 98 different components if each component has to go through that data, right? If each component needs that data. But instead of doing this, I basically do is I would just wrap it inside a provider, right? So now if I have 100 different components here, it's going to have access to that data. I don't need to pass it through props, right? So that's why we use context API. Because it eliminates prop drilling, right? Prop drilling. It eliminates prop drilling. Another famous question. You guys are. Did you guys get the concept, right? Why would you use context API, right? Okay, cool. Another thing was, what's the difference between an arrow function and regular function? Pretty simple, right? Like whenever you walk into a React interview, expect to be asked about JavaScript all the time. Like they will ask you about JavaScript. They might ask you 10 React questions, and then they will ask you 5 different JavaScript questions. Even when you are doing React, you are writing JavaScript, right? So difference between an arrow function and a regular function. Do you guys know about this? The regular function would be, let's say we have a function called app, and then it basically returns, let's say, a div called hello world, right? Div. So this, or we have something called app, and we have return, and then we have div. So what's the difference? What's the difference between these two functions, right?
Does an arrow function have a return line? I thought the arrows, yeah.
Here,
Yeah.
we can write, because I'm returning just one component, right? If I had to return multiple component, I do it something like this. But if I had only one thing that I'm returning, I could just say like this, right? This is also the same as this is same as this, right? Because there's just one element that we're returning, so this will return just one component. But if I had multiple components nested, I would use this. Because this is not ideal. This is one liner. Basically, whenever you are writing a function that returns anything, for example, utility function, let's say if you are writing const add a function, you want to say a plus b, so that means like take a comma b, and this means like take a and b and return a plus b, right? So this is arrow function, right? So just having only one element. But if you have multiple elements, you'd have to give return if you have more than one element. So what's the difference between this function app and this const? This is an arrow function, this is a regular function. So what's the difference? Anyone?
Isn't the second one more streamlined? Like you can do it in one single line.
Yeah, that's for one single, if we are returning one simple thing or something like this, right? So this is more modern. This is ES6, right? They introduced arrow function in ES6, but this function was like, we can say like this is kind of a deprecated function, but like we still use it. Not deprecated, but like this is like more modern, because the current standard for JavaScript is ES6, right? Let's see, current JS standard. I think we have ES8 or something that came out. Nope. MDN JavaScript CSS. There is one major difference. I think what we currently have is ES8. I think 1 second. ES8. Yeah, we have ES9, ES10, ES10. We have ES10, but the standard is ES6. So anytime you write a code, you are going to be writing in ES6. You are going to be using the standard of ES6, right? So one major difference is that whenever you use a function whenever you use an arrow function, there is something called key binding, right? Key binding. And then in key binding, we use this keyword, right? Keyword. So arrow function eliminates that. It doesn't uses, we don't have to write this keyword. For example, we have a function, let's say, even with function, let's say we have, let's say, const user equals to, user has a name, right? Name can be Harry. Then let's say we have a function inside of that user, right? Let's say we can say function, or we can say name. Name can be a function, and this name we are going to log the name. So whenever we write console.log, we're going to say welcome, and then if we want to say name, if we want to call the name, we would say this.name, right? So this is how we would do if we are using regular function, right? We have a name inside a variable. We can write function inside a function. We can write function inside of a variable in JavaScript. But whenever, let's say we have a name, we have a variable that can change, and then we have a function that is calling this variable, and everything is everything is stored inside of one variable. Then if we want to use this, we need to use a reference, right? We used to use a reference for that name. So we use this keyword. But when with ES6, we can have the same thing, but we don't need to use this keyword. This is the main difference. We can say this, we can say, hey, we don't need to use this keyword. We can directly call that. And then under the hood, it is going to know, hey, this is trying to reference this. So this name means welcome Harry. So that's the only difference.
Okay, eliminates this. And
yes.
Next line of code. And what is the next difference?
Arrow functions. If you see, arrow functions don't have their own binding to this. We also have something called argument, similar to this, or super. So whenever you see a class component, you see a keyword called super. You see a keyword called constructor, right? With arrow function, there is none of that. With arrow function, nope. For example, hey, we have a material this. We want to log that material. We run it. It's going to give us an array. But 1 second. param1 statement. Async. Let's see. No examples. Yeah, there are other big features called, like, this is the one thing that you were referring to, right? If you can write one line function that is going to return a square, or you can write with a return statement. It's the same thing. This is called implied, and this is called explicit return. This is called implicit return. This function can do that. We can have function inside a function, right? But the major thing is key binding or data. This key binding, we don't have to use this argument or super. We use super in class component. If you see class component React, if you see React class component, you are going to see something called super, which is, let's see. You see super, right? You see super. Whenever we are writing a state, you need to use this keyword. You need to use this keyword if you are writing class component. You need to have constructor, right? So in class component cannot be an arrow function, right? You see, like this cannot be an arrow function. This has to be a regular function, because with arrow function you cannot use constructor, you cannot use super, you don't have to use this. So that is the only difference that the interviewer is looking for to like get as a response. We cannot use constructor. They don't have their own binding to this keyword. That means like we can easily reference that variable without using this.
Okay.
Let's move on to this again. What are the changes that were made in ES6? So because everyone is going to be using ES6 JavaScript because that's the standard, they expect you to know like what are the things that was introduced in ES6. There are two main things. One we just learned, which was arrow function, right? What's the another thing? Can anybody tell me?
Functional component ES6.
With ES6, what are the main change that was done in ES6? We are going to talk about it. This is, they introduce let and const, right? Let and const. Before we only had var. Like every time we wanted to use a variable, we are using var. But like on ES6, they created let, const, and then we have a difference of these three keywords, which is another questions again, which is like, what's the difference between var, let, and const, right? So with this var, let, and const, there is a concept called hoisting, right? This concept is important. They expect you to know. They might not ask you like, hey, tell me about hoisting, but they might tell you like, hey, what's the difference between var, let, and const? Where would I use var? Or like in general, what's the difference, right? So there is a couple of difference. I'll do this. I'll say var, let, and const. We all know that if a variable changes, we use var or let, right? So this is going to be variable change this is also is going to variable change, but this has to be a constant, right? That is like everybody knows that, right? You guys know that.
Yeah.
But what's the other difference? One of the main thing that the interviewer is looking for is like scoping, right? This is concept of scoping. Scoping means here on this function, let's say on this function, what is the scope of name, right? Can I come out of this function and say, hey, let name equals to Ram? Like, can I say let name equals to Ram here when I have already defined the name? Let's say this is var. Let's say this is or I already have a name. Now I'm out of that function. Can I redefine that? Can I restore? Can I change the variable? I cannot, right? I cannot. That is something called scoping. That means the scope of this variable is limited to this function. This is not accessible outside of this bracket, right? This is not accessible outside of this bracket. So that is something called, we have block scoping, we have global scoping, and we have functional scoping. We'll see the example. Yeah, right here. We have a function, we have a variable called width. We are logging the width, and then we call this width outside of that function. And then whenever we do that, let's do it here. Let's write this function here, and let's write this here. Whenever we call it outside of that function, it's going to give us an error. It says width is not defined. But here we have defined width inside, but because the scope of width is only limited to this function, outside of that function, we don't know what width is. So that is called scoping. That is, this width has a scoping of this function. So inside of this function, I can have another function, and then if I call width inside of another function, we know that width is 100 because it's defined. It's inside of this brackets. For example, let's look into another. Okay, let's look into the same thing. Inspect console. I have something like this, but here if I say function, let's say new width, and then I call width, or I can store, let's say var new width, or new equals to width times 2, and then console.log new. Now this width is accessible here, right? Because the width is accessible anywhere inside of this bracket, anywhere inside of this bracket. That means it has a scope of this function set width. So anything that is inside will have access to that function. So if I call here set width, oh, new is reserved keyword. I am going to do this new width, and I'm going to do that. I still have width of 100. Inside is undefined. Let's see. Why is it undefined? Oh, I'm redeclaring. I have a new variable, or I can say new width equals to width times 2. Set width, still undefined. But let's look into this. It takes a width, and we WIDTH this width, and width times 2 console.log. I'm not sure, but basically the concept is of scope, right? So with variable, if we use var, it is available on a global scope. But if we have let, it is available on block scope. One second, I'll explain what is block scope and functional scope. This is also available on block scope. What this means is this is a block, right? This is a block. this is a block. This is a block. If I have here let, that might not be, we might not be able to use it inside outside of this block. If I have here, let's say let name2 equals to Harry2. Now we cannot use name2 outside of this block. So this name2 is only limited to this block. So that is called block scope. And then, but if we use var name3 equals to Harry3, then this var is accessible. I can call this var here, right? Console.log and var, and I can say name3. It will be accessible. Variable is globally scoped. It can be accessible. So whenever we are using something that is going to be global, we use var. But in ES6, what they told us, what they in the guideline, what they say is never use var. Like even if you want to use, never use var. Always use only let and const. So whenever you were doing a project with Gorak, I don't think you used var. It was always let or const, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say you have a variable and then you are sending that variable through a prop, but you are declaring it as a var. That means everybody like that has a global scope that can mess up your data. But if you have a const or let, that is not going to mess up your data. I think FreeCodeCamp had one good example of this scope. I think, right? Yes. Here, var. This is outside of this function, right? This var is outside of this function. So this fruit equals to apple is accessible inside. This is globally scoped. This var is globally scoped. Now local scope is if we have a variable here, let's say we use let, or if we use let here, that is going to be limited to this scope, right? This is called local scope. And then if we have outside of that function, that is going to be a global scope. And functional scope is if we have something inside of a function, then that is accessible only inside of that function. That is called a functional scope. So if we try to access it outside, we are going to get undefined. Oh yes, that's the reason why we were getting undefined, because we are calling the function outside of that function, and then we're trying to log outside of another function, right? So we are getting that undefined because that is functional scope. Same thing here. We have a var, apple, const, and let inside of one block. And then when we log everything, we see only apple because apple is variable. So this is accessible globally. This is accessible outside of this brackets. But const and let are block scoped or functional scope. They are not accessible outside of this. So we get this as undefined.
Okay. That's good example.
Yeah, this is a very good example because variable outside of this scope, we have access to apple, but we don't have access to banana or strawberry because those are block scope. They cannot store that data outside of these brackets.
Yeah.
That is one. Another thing is JSX, right? What is JSX? You guys are using JSX all the time whenever you are learning React from. Whenever you started learning React on day one, you have been using JSX. So what is JSX?
JavaScript, XML.
Yes. JavaScript and XML, right? What is XML, right? XML, HTTP is, HTML is an XML language, right? It is XML. HTML is XML, right? Extensible markup language. Whenever we write HTML, we say hypertext markup language, right? So XML is extensible markup language. So HTML is XML. So JavaScript XML, that JSX means we can write both JavaScript and HTML inside of one function, right? Whenever inside of our return statement, we can write JavaScript, we can write HTML. So that is JSX. Pretty standard HTML questions. Also, you need to expect HTML and CSS questions, not CSS mainly, but like HTML. They're going to talk about accessibility, what are semantics, why do you use semantics tag? Can you give me one example of a HTML semantics tag? What's the difference between this and this? What's the difference? Can you tell me between these two HTML tags? We can see the difference. 1 second. HTML editor. Let's go into one editor and see, right? 1 second. Write yourself. Let's look into what we are doing, right? Okay. Let's say this is B and this is a B tag. And let's say strong. This is a strong tag. Let's run this. So what is the difference? Both of them are bold tags, right? But what is the difference?
Is it? I don't know.
Both of them are bold tags, right? Both of them, what they do is they basically make the text bold, right? Text bold, right? But why? When should you use B tag and when should you use strong tag? What is the difference?
Is it because of accessibility?
Yes.
Strong tag can be found. Yeah.
Yes. That's why it's called a semantic HTML, right? Bold tag, this is semantic HTML. Strong tag is semantic HTML, because whenever you are using, let's say, a device, right, where people who are blind, they touch the device and they know like what is the content in the device, like it's kind of accessible device, right? Let's say, what do you call that device? I don't remember the name. But like, let's say in terms of accessibility, if you have a website that has a B tag, that means those people who are disabled is not going to know, hey, this is a bold text, or this is an important text. That's why it's bold, right? But if you use strong tag, if they are using accessibility devices, they are going to know, hey, this is important. This is something important, and they are going to know what is inside of this, right? Because this is important. So that's the difference between like regular HTML tag and semantic HTML. That's why we can make a navigation using div, right? But why we don't use navigation using div? We use nav tag, right? Because the people who are using accessibility devices needs to know what is in your website, what is the content in your website. How do they know? They know because we are using this tag. They know, hey, this is a navigation, or they know, hey, this is a main content. That means this is a body inside. This is inside of a main content. This is something, and then we use something called header. Hey, this is a heading. We use something called footer, but we can do the same thing just by using div, right? But we don't do it. We don't use div all the time. Why? We use semantic HTML because it is for accessibility. Those people who uses this accessibility device, those people who are disabled, still have access to your website. They know what's happening in a website. They know which is the header, which is the footer. So why is this important? This is important for companies, right? Because their user base has to account for disabled people. If you see, like banks, they have disabled people have bank accounts, right? How do they navigate to their bank accounts, right? They use the bank UI, right? Maybe an app or maybe a website to log into their account, right? But how do they know, hey, this is my account information, this is how much I have, this is important, this is a notice, maybe I'm getting a notification. How do they know? We use accessibility tags, right? That's how they know, because they are using accessible devices. Why do we use alt tag with images, right? We use alternate tag to images, and then we give, hey, this is an image of something, right? We write on an alternate tab. Why? Again, in terms of accessibility, let's say you have a blind people, right? How do they know this is an image of something? We use alternate tab, right? This is semantic HTML, this is accessibility. And there is a rule that I think even government has a rule in terms of accessibility. Accessibility HTML. They have this guideline W3C standard, which is Web Accessibility Initiative. This is W3C is the organization that comes up with these rules and regulations, right? So they have this standard that every website needs to meet, right? If you say, hey, we are serving, we have a user base of disabled people, that means the website has to be accessible to them. So how do we do? We use semantic HTML, use accessibility tags, semantic tags. So that's how we account for.
To make it accessible, does that another application read the application? How do blind can have access to what is, because they cannot read? So do
right,
they hear the voice?
They have different devices, accessibility devices. They have devices, blind people.
Well, it reads for them, right?
Yeah, they have devices, for example, like this, right? They have some devices. They need to know whenever they are using a website, they need to know what is what. Or like, let's say it's a very old people, for vision impaired people, like how do they know? Like once these devices look for these tags, those devices look for these tags. That's why we use that tag. That means, hey, we want to have something bold. I can use B tag, it is going to be bold. But if I use strong tag, it is going to be bold. And also the accessible device is going to know, hey, this is a text that needs to be bold, or this is an important text that needs to be bold. So that is why we use semantic HTML. This is one of the important general interview questions. What are HTML5 semantics?
So Nitish, you're saying that the disabled and blind people would actually like try to code and try to know like which one is header and which one is main.
Not code. Like think of it like this. Let's say a disabled person or old guy who is vision impaired, he cannot see properly. He has a bank account. He can log into his bank, right? But how do he know? Like he's using an accessible device, but how does he know? Hey, this is let's say bank sends him an important notice. How does he know? On an email or on the website there is an important notice. How does he know? He knows because of this tags, right? Because his device is going to read these tags, and then whenever he is going through the website on that device, it's going to let him know like, hey, this is a header. I'm in navigation, I'm using a nav tag. Or if I'm inside of a main, that means, hey, this is the main content. That's why we also have something called article, right? Hey, this is an article, right? We have a tag called article. We have so many HTML semantic tags.
So from the audio of the device, they make an image of the actual web page they are going through, right? That's reading, yeah.
There are devices that reads like section. That means, hey, this is a different section. I can do div, right? I can do div here, right? It is still going to be the same thing. But why we use semantic is we need to account for accessibility. Maybe some people they use accessible devices. Now those devices is not going to understand div, right? Every time they are just going to, maybe they understand div, but the people are not able to navigate. But if you have this website, let's say, hey, we have this tag, that device is going to say, hey, this is the navigation. Hey, this is main content. Hey, this is the header, or this is the topic of this content. Hey, this is the footer. You are at the end of the page. Figure is like with, I think we use image with figure, right? I'm not sure. We have caption. We give fig caption is for the image. We give a caption. Details. We have aside. We have summary. Summary is like span or like H1 text, any text paragraph. It can be a summary. We have time, that is going to tell them the time. Instead of storing a time in a div, we can store time in a time tag, right? That then those devices is going to say, hey, this is a time. But if we use div, that device is not going to say this is a time, although this is a time, right?
Okay.
So that's why we use semantic HTML, just to be accessible. So everybody can access our website. Everybody can use our app. It's like inclusive, right? We talk about diversity. We talk about inclusivity. So it's like inclusivity. There are some rules in this profession, which is like, hey, your website is great, but you are not doing anything to account for accessibility. That means your Google ranking is going to be low because you are not accessible to those people.
Yeah.
Accessible tags, same thing. These strong tags, not the B tags, strong tag, article, all tags, all of those tags are accessibility tags. Basic interview questions. Another thing, this comes into React, is how would you measure performance of your app whenever you are testing your app or whenever you are coding? How do you know your app is doing, is very performant? How do you know, right?
Load test.
Sorry?
Load test, maybe probably.
Yeah, you can do end-to-end testing, right? End-to-end testing, E2E testing. You can do unit testing. We talked about unit testing on one session, right? We wrote a small test. But how do you measure the performance of your app? How do you know? How do you know your website is loading faster? This means basically, how do you know your app is loading faster? How do you know your app is not lagging? How do you know if somebody is using a 3G internet, so they are trying to load a website? How do you measure the performance of your app, right? So that's one of the questions that I was asked, that you guys may be asked, like, but this kind of question is very, you guys need to be like pretty comfortable answering these type of questions. Let's go to inspect network. I'm going to say I have a slow 3G network, right? So if I refresh this page, it's going to take time to load, right? Oh, it didn't take so much time. This website is performant. Okay, I'm going to disable the cache. Now it's taking time, right? Now it's taking time. It's loading, right? Now it's loading.
Does it entirely depend on the website, or does it depend on the
It depends also.
capacity of the internet that you're using?
For example, I come here on network tab, and then I see everything, right? Whatever is loading. Now, what you can say is like, hey, maybe I have an image, right? That image can be 3 or 4 megabytes. You don't know, right? Right now it's in bytes or kilobytes. That's why it's loading faster, right? We have an image that has been loaded in 4.16 seconds, which has a size of 49.2 kilobyte, right? This image. So how would you test it? How would you improve the performance? You'd basically say, hey, like I use Chrome developer tools, which is this. I basically use my network tab, see all of my images, if they are being optimized. If they are not being optimized, I would use some library to optimize those images. I would also check the size of my CSS, right? I would say if the JavaScript size is more, right now it's 1.4 kilobyte, right? So it's very less. So we have hooks, right? This is the JavaScript. The file is very small. That's why it's loading faster. I would check about their sizes. If the JavaScript size is more, I would probably write some Webpack configuration to decrease the size. Also, I'd use performance tab. I would basically use, let's say, different tools. For example, we have a tool called Lighthouse that is going to analyze. This is provided by Google, by the way. So whenever, if you are using Google Chrome, if you are using any browser that is based on Chromium, which is Google Chrome is based on Chromium. Right now I'm using Brave. Brave is also built on top of Chromium. That's why I have access to Lighthouse. This is what we use to test performance, SEO, accessibility. So we'll just analyze this. So now when we analyze it, it's going to check our app. It's going to say it is going to check our app in different devices, different network settings. It is going to load our app. It is going to take screenshots, and then it is going to say, hey, is our app performant, right? Like, yeah, our app is performant. We have an 81 rating, right? Which is here largest. It is going to take screenshots on like what loaded when, and then it's going to give us some tips on how we can reduce or how we can make our app faster. For example, right on this website, it's saying, hey, reduce the JavaScript that you are not using. You don't have to use the JavaScript file for this page if this page doesn't require that JavaScript file. Or it's saying minify the JavaScript file. So how do we minify the JavaScript file? We can use Webpack, right? Webpack is used to minify JavaScript. React comes with Webpack in build, right? It says serve image in next format. Right now we have an image is PNG. Maybe we can use the user image converter, write some code, change this PNG into WebP, which is another format. So right now, if it is 69 kilobyte, if you use WebP, it can be 10 kilobyte, right? So those are the things that you might want to come up with. Also, you can say, hey, like images do not have a width and a height, right? Like maybe you have an image tag, maybe you have image, you are not giving it a width and a height, so that's why it's loading the full image. Or it can say, hey, like you can have a cache policy. What do you mean by cache policy? That means once I load this website and then I again come back to this website, next time it's saving that temporary files in my browser, so it loads faster, right? One example is, let's say you log into Facebook, right? For the first time, if you remember, or if you go clear your browser, everything, and then if you open facebook.com and log in, it's going to take some time for you to log in. Maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. But the next time you log in, it's going to be faster because it's saving those files in your cache. That means locally it is storing some files in your browser. That's why next time you log in, it's faster, right? Maybe you can do that, right? You can come up with that, right? So those are the things that is basically those are the things basically I would answer how, that is how I would answer, like how do I measure performance in my app during our testing. Maybe I write in testing, unit testing, but that is not going to measure performance, right? Maybe I would use Lighthouse to measure performance, right? I would convert images to WebP format, which is web format. So it's not PNG, it's not JPEG, WebP, right? WebP means even though if you have a big image, it's not going to decrease the quality, it's going to only compress it. Or you can say compress images. I would minify JavaScript, right? Or I would not render components that are not needed, right? Because if you render components that are not needed, that means you are rendering extra JavaScript, right? Not render components that are not needed. And so many things, right? So many things.
What does JMeter do for performance? Is it just load performance or?
Which one?
JMeter.
Janitor?
JMeter, like one, I have one friend who was doing a JMeter.
I have, is this, oh, load testing. Okay. Oh, it's in Apache. Okay, Apache performance. Okay. Open source Java application. So they are testing Java application for performance. So, but in terms of React, we are doing JavaScript application, right? We are doing web application. We are not doing Java application. So Lighthouse is a great tool. If you tell them, hey, I use Lighthouse. Yeah, same like JMeter, but like Lighthouse is for web, right?
The web pages, okay.
Yes, Lighthouse. It is also going to say, hey, is your website accessible, right? Hey, like, are you using links? Does the links has a name? If it doesn't have a descriptive name, it's going to complain, right? It's going to say, hey, maybe you have a H1 element, and then inside of H1 element, you might have a H6 element, and then inside of H6 element, you might have a H2 element. That is not good, right? Because whenever we write H tags, which is like heading tags, we always go from H1 to H2 to H3. We don't go from H1 to H6 to H2. We don't go this way, right? We don't go this way. This is the correct way. If you H1 means it's really important, S2 means it's less important than H1, S3 means it's less important than H2. So that's how we put our content based on importance. And that is also going to help, like, because hey, like in terms of accessibility, those devices are going to read H1 elements, and then if we have something in H1, it's going to say, hey, this is the topic, or this is really important, right? Inside you can have a summary, but hey, this is the title. So that's how. And then here we have like best practices. We have something called audit. This is the W3RC accessibility standard that checks. It checks for W3 standard, and then it runs audit. It says, hey, this has passed. That means it has met the standard for accessibility. That means this website, if somebody disabled is opening this website on accessible devices, they are able to navigate this website easily because it's very accessible. It has 91 rating, right, out of 100. So see, images have alt tags, forms has labels, the page content heading, links, has a title element. It has a HTML has a lang attribute. That means which language is it? Is it in English? Is it in Spanish? It has an attribute. So those kind of things. So that is that is how you measure performance. Or if somebody asks you how do you measure accessibility, how do you write accessible React application, or somebody say how do you make sure your website is accessible, then you come up with those things. Like you tell them about Lighthouse. That's how I test. I write HTML semantics tags. And then I test that semantics through Lighthouse. You can say those things.
Okay.
Constructors, not really important. I don't get asked often. I only got asked one time because they were their code base had a lot of class components, so they wanted to make sure that I knew about class components. So what is a constructor? A constructor is basically nothing more than a function, right? Whenever we write a class-based functions, we need constructor, and inside of a constructor, we give us, without constructor, we cannot create our states in class components. So constructor are basically function. We write it inside of a class components. And then they will also ask you about hooks. Now this is in Redux. I'll not go into this. Also, another thing was a React router, right? We learned about navigation, right? But again, they want to like kind of know like right now, if you are doing React or if you are using any technology, go to package.json file, look at the version, just be familiar with it. You don't need to know every package's version, but know the package version of React, React router, React DOM. What else? Yeah, you need to basically know the version of this JavaScript, because you will be using JavaScript. This is ES6, React DOM, and React. These are going to be same version because same company is going to update React DOM and React at the same time. So currently it's at 18. React DOM is also at 18. I'm not sure about React router. React router. One way to know it is npmjs.org. You go to npmjs, and then you write React router. You write the package. You're going to see the version. It's currently in version 6, right? If you go into React, currently at 18, right? So you can check it that way. React Router is at version 6. So basically some few questions, and then you can also say, like, if they ask you, hey, I've also worked with React 17, and then you can just Google or like look into what are the new feature in 18 that wasn't in 17, talk about it, tell them what you are excited about, like for in this feature, like they kind of look through it. It is very conversational, so like just be prepared for it. Or if somebody asks you like, hey, what do you like about React 18 that you didn't like about React 17, right? So those kind of things. This is again Redux. This question. Why would you prefer React over Angular? I have never used Angular. Okay, like how would you answer this? If you have never used Angular, how would you answer this? Why do you prefer React over Angular?
No idea.
So React and Angular, right? One is a framework, one is a library, right? So let's see. React is a library, right? Library. Angular is a framework. You can tell them like React is compatible with anything. You can have Java on the back end, you can have React in the front end. You can have React just for the UI, and then you can use something else. So you can use React with different packages, like literally it's just a library. It's just you just use React to build components on top of anything. You can have a backend in Go, you can have a backend in Python. You can do it as you like, right? You can write components however you like. You can write plain JavaScript however you like. But that's what library does. Library doesn't give you a set of rules to write a component, right? React doesn't tell you, hey, write a component this way. React just tells you like, hey, we can write components in these different ways, right? So it is just a library. But Angular is a framework. So if you are learning Angular, you follow a specific pattern. That means the flow of your application development is determined by Angular, but not by you. But with React, you can decide what you want to use with your application. So because React is just on the front end, React is just the layer for the UI, nothing more, right? You can say this React over Angular. You can also say React as a one-way data binding, right? Which is like it flows one direction, top to bottom. But Angular doesn't, right? Angular has two-way. You can also say performance. React is very performance. React has virtual DOM, right? It uses virtual DOM and it updates the real DOM instantly. It is very performant, right? Data binding, right? One-way data binding. We talked about one-way data binding, right? But with Angular, it is two-way data binding. That means you have to go back and forth between your components. That means it's going to affect your performance, right? Right? One-way data binding, it goes one way. But with two-way, it's like a loop, right? You can talk about architecture, right? React is very simple to learn, easy to run. You can build complex UI using different libraries, right? The ecosystem is large. Angular is a framework. It comes out with like it has everything that you need. For example, with React, if you want to use server-side rendering, you can use any other packages or any other thing to write server-side code. But with Angular, you have to use Angular, right? You have to use Angular Universal. Like the ecosystem is like Angular limits you. But just talk about how scalable it is, how performant React is, how easy it is to learn, how it doesn't confine you into using particular framework. So it gives you option to use anything that you like. So that's why
When you said framework, what does it mean? Does it mean a different
framework
set?
means like, let's say, hey, you are using Angular, you want to do something. Let's say you want to integrate, you want to have a backend Java and then backend with Java, and then you want to integrate that with React. It's possible with a library because React is just a library. You can use multiple libraries to build an application. But with the framework, you have to follow the guidelines set by Angular, right? For example, we just looked an example, right, with Angular.
Java, Python, JavaScript, Ruby, all these are different framework or they are different?
No, Angular,
language?
React, Vue, those are built using JavaScript, right? The only difference between is is it a framework or is it a library, right? Library means like you only use it for UI. You don't use it for backend. You don't use it for anything else. You don't use it to write server code, right? You write server language using Node.js, which is JavaScript, but you can write the front end using React. That's fine. But if you are using Angular, you are going to write server-side language, server-side code in Angular, not in Node, right? So this is limiting you from using what you want. It is saying, hey, if you want to use Angular, use this. It is dictating what to use. But React is telling you, hey, you can use whatever you want. I'm just the front end part. I'm just the UI part, right? What else? Dependency injection, data binding, bidirectional, unidirectional. Data binding is something you can talk about. State management, right? You can use Redux, mobs, mobx, context API, anything. But with state management with Angular, you only have two options: NGRX or RxJS. That's it, right? If you want to use, if you want to create an Angular app using a command line interface, you have to use Angular CLI. But with React, you can use any CLI. I can use this CLI, and then I can just say, I don't have to use create React app. I can say dir folder cd folder. I can say npm init, and then I can say folders. I just initialized npm. Yes. Now if I look into this, I have a package.json. I don't have React. Now I can say npm install React and React DOM, right? Any CLI, right? We can use React with any CLI. We have so the only difference is that Angular is a framework. That means whatever you do in Angular is determined by Angular. That means whatever you want to achieve something, then Angular is telling you to use something for that task. But with the React is not telling you. It's just the front end. Whatever you like, you can use it. That's the only difference between a framework and React. Between a framework.
Somebody raising a hand. I don't know. You need to respond.
Yeah, in terms of if you have to be specific, you can talk about React is performance, right? Performance, right? That means React uses virtual DOM, right? But Angular uses real DOM. That means if you change a component, then what React does is it compares with the virtual DOM and then updates only things that is necessary. But Angular doesn't uses that virtual DOM technology. That means Angular is not performant than React. React is very performant because it only updates what's necessary, but it has to update everything, right? In terms of performance, React is like easy for beginners, right? And then you can have the flexibility to use anything with React. Flexibility, that means it is not dictating you to use anything. Use something in particular. For example, with Angular, let's say I want to have a state management. Now what Angular says like, yeah, you can either use RxJS or you can use NGRX. You only have two choices. With React, hey, you can use anything you want. You want to use mobx, Redux, context, anything. You can create your own state management app and you can use it with React.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, what are hooks, right? This is the bread and butter of React, right? React 18, React 16. What are hooks? Hooks are functions, right? Hooks are basically functions that performs certain tasks. For example, use effect. but whenever you describe hooks, you can say functions that performs lifecycle methods in React, right? Like mounting, updating, unmounting, right? We use hooks, right? With class component, we use these functions called component did mount, component will mount, component did update, component will update. We had these functions, we had to use these. But with hooks, just a function that performs lifecycle method. For example, use effect. Use effect does updating, so it is going to say component did update. It's going to run this lifecycle method, right? Use effect, use state. It's going to run component did mount. Render function. Whenever we return something, that is called rendering. Render is component did mount and component did update. Because whenever a prop changes, state changes, we can update it initially, we can mount it, and so on. Right? Basically, it performs lifecycle methods in React.
Render is also a hook.
No, render is a function. For example, class component. With class component, you have to call this function to return something. With functional component, you don't have to write render. You can just directly return it.
Okay.
But render is a lifecycle method. So whenever you see lifecycle method in React, you see render, right? Render is mounting and updating. That means it's rendering a content. Initially, it renders. Whenever props changes or state changes, it's going to re-render, right? So that is a function. So render is a function. It is a part of a lifecycle method in React. So component did mount, will mount, render, component did mount, right? Props and state. Again, in functional, this is class component, this is functional component. Render, we don't write render, but there is render. That's how it is rendering things in the DOM. So that's why it's a part of a lifecycle method. What version of JavaScript? V8 is the V8 is the engine. V8 engine is the one that runs Node. It helps us run JavaScript in browser. So it's V8 is basically the technology that helps run JavaScript in the browser, right? So V8 JS. V8 is basically a JavaScript engine, right? What it does is it runs JavaScript in the browser. So this is their official website. But yeah, the only reason everything is running is because of V8. So, and it's open source. Yeah, those are like very basic, like most repeated questions that I often get asked during an interview. I did so many interviews. I have one tomorrow, so I'm expecting same questions. Sometimes they give you some questions like technical questions to solve. For example, this is one of the questions. I got hired from these questions, right? What does the function following for code do, and which prints first why? And like, can you tell me, like, what is this function doing, and which is printed first, and why? Set timeout is a JavaScript function, right? It's a web API, right? Given by the browser. Like fetch. Fetch is also a web API given by the browser. We have set timeout. We have set interval. We have window, right? So if I, 1 second, if I go here, I can say window, right? So this is given by the browser, right? All of this. We have clear interval. We have also set timeout. Let's see. Let's clear this. Window dot set timeout, right? So it's a function, right? It is a function, right? So I'm using the same. They are using the same function. So what is this code doing, and which prints first, and why?
Is set timeout a asynchronous function?
Yes.
So that means 2 would be printed first because set timeout would be taken out of the event loop. So 2 would be printed first, and then because it's asynchronous code, and then the asynchronous function set timeout would execute after completion of console log 2. So 2 would be printed first.
Yeah, that's a that's a good description. Anything, whenever we are using web API, it takes some time, right? Because web API means it acts like an interface between your code and the browser, right? For example, you want to fetch something. Let's not talk about asynchronous here. Let's talk about synchronicity, right? Whenever you are using web API, what JavaScript has to do is it comes to this function. It tells, okay, hey, this is a web API. Now I need to go into web API, go into the window object, find set timeout. I need to run that function, and then I need to come inside, use that function, whatever code that was in set timeout, use that function, pass this argument, and then get out of this function, right? So that takes time, right? So instead, this is outside of this function. So what it does is, okay, this set timeout, it's going to happen, it's going on. So I'll go ahead until I get that output back, until the web API comes back with an output. I'll go ahead and run some other code that is down below, right? Same with fetch, right? So it's going to go with console, and then once the set timeout function, it goes to web API, goes to set timeout, runs that function, gives the function this argument, and then gives the output, and then first it prints 2, and then it goes and print 3. Yeah, that's a very good description. That's basically what's happening. Not just set timeout, anything. Set interval, window, object, like with everything, like with any of these functions, right? With any of these window objects, everything, it is what it's doing, right? If we are using set timeout, it is a function. We are using set interval function, anything. Screen x, that means the x coordinate of the screen, y coordinate of the screen. So, but to get this value, it has to go through web API, it has to go through window object, and it has to go inside, grab this value, and then come out, right? So that's a very good answer. Yeah, that's what's basically happening.
Is it something related with the promise that we talked about?
Yes.
Sure.
Asynchronous JavaScript, everything is a promise, right? I told you, like, everything is a promise. Even you are using fetch, but if you are not using async await, still fetch is a promise.
Yeah, whenever it has to use certain API and get the data from the API, that's a promise, right? It's going to take some time.
Yes. Okay. In this case, this set timeout is a web API, right? Web API. That means browser is providing us this function, right? It's a web API. It's a promise. That means the promise is going to take time. This web API is going to say, hey, I promise you I'll come back with the output for this. And then whenever it goes to window object, it finds this function. During that time, it's basically going to run the code, right? Whatever is left. So this is going to run, and once it gets the output, once we receive the promise back, and then we console this. So that is what's happening under the hood. If you write this code and if you run this code, you might get this first and then this second. Doesn't really matter, but like in terms of time, like millisecond, microsecond, millionth of a second, in terms of that time, in terms of that execution runtime, this executes first and this executes second.
Correct. Yep.
Another function, write a function call for the following, so the output is 3, right? Very simple, right? How do you call this function so your output is 3, right? How would you call a function so that the output is 3? This is for a React developer position, right? this interview, this question is how I got my job. Yeah, I know it sounds kind of funny. It sounds stupid because like whenever I sit into an interview, I have a senior React interview, and then
You just
the
have
recruiter
arguments in it.
Yes, you basically say, hey, like this is a function. I give the function a name, right? It's missing a name. So I call that function and then I give an argument of 1 and 2. So it's basically going to take 1 and then 2, and then it's going to return the addition of those two objects, two parameters, right? Yeah, pretty simple, straightforward, right? And then you guys might, after some technical rounds, like questions and answer back and forth, you might be invited into a technical round where you'll have to share your screen and then code, right? So that is quite haunting, but I'll show you like one of the questions that I had, right? I still have the link of, this was the same question that I was asked, but it's going to be pretty simple. Whatever you see here, it's a class component. Now, when you see this code, don't get overwhelmed. Just look into the code, take some time, try to understand it, right? First thing I'll do is I'll go to package. I'll say, okay.
How much time do they give you to figure out all codes?
It really depends. Sometimes it's coding round is usually 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay.
So it really depends. My last interview was like, hey, can you write a component? And then I wrote a component that returns anything. I returned JSX, hello world. And then they say, hey, can you write another component? Now, can you make the first component the parent of the second component? So that is what they ask, right? Those are interview questions. So here, pretty simple to-do list. We have done it. You guys have done it to-do list using context API. You guys have done it to-do list without using context API, right? So if you see, when you see the code, student scale view, we have h1. We have a state that from a to-do. We have a constructor. We have a state. Initially, it's empty. Input value is empty, right? Now, what it's doing is it's mapping through that to-do. So whenever we write it, it's mapping and it is showing those to-do, right? Right now we have nothing. So if I write, hey, add item, it's showing this, right? It's a list. And HR is horizontal line, right? It's showing a line. And then input is input. Now the value of an input is this.state.input value, right? Whatever we input. On change, we know about on change function. It takes an event, right? We did all the time, right? Whenever we are making this, we had sessions. We talked about event or target.value, right? So what we takes an event and now it sets and it updates the state with whatever we wrote, whatever is the event or target.value. That means whatever I write here, it's updating that, right? And there's a button. Whenever I click this button, it's going to say the state of the to-do. It's going to say, hey, whatever the to-do we had before, plus the to-do that we like currently wrote and clicked it, right? We are adding value into an array, right? So that's what's happening here. So this is basically the code, right? So now what is the question they are going to ask? They're going to say, hey, this is in class component. Can you change it into functional component, right? I think out of 10 interviews, almost 4 or 5 interviews, they're going to say, hey, like, can you change this into a functional component? They will have a simple component written in class component. Maybe it can be a counter, it can be a to-do, like simple component, and they'll say, hey, like, can you update this into a functional component?
Okay.
So if they don't specify, is there any preference, functional or class component to go for?
Yeah, if they say like which do you prefer, or just if it comes up anytime, or if they don't say anything, they will just say create a component. Always do functional component because we no longer use class component. From React version 16, functional component was introduced, hooks were introduced, so that class component was removed. So the standard is functional component.
Okay.
Yeah. So
and how many people will be watching while you're
coding,
trying to figure out codes and writing a code?
it really depends. Sometimes one, sometimes two, sometimes there will be someone just to take the note, and there will be one interviewer. Like it really depends.
And do they grill you between like what? Why do you think that's?
They might.
Okay.
They might tell you like, hey, you did this. I saw you did this. Like, why would you do this? They would ask something like this. Like, for example, hey, I saw you using this 3 dots, right? What's happening in this? Can you please explain? They might say something like this, right?
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, so you can say this is spread operator. I'm like existing to do. I'm basically spreading existing to do and then adding the recent one or something. Yeah, those kind of questions. Pretty simple.
In case, why are we trying to add the new value on chains and button on click?
On click is we are pushing that into here, right? And then we are pushing that into our state, right? We're updating the state, right? Whenever we are clicking, and then we are displaying that to do. Input value can change, right? We are just setting input value just so that we know what is here, right? This is the input value, right? Now this is also a state, right? Initially it's empty, right? Right now, whenever I'm typing, I'm updating that state, right? So we are keeping track of that state.
But do we really need the on chains function there? Because like the on click would ultimately do the job, right? So
but you wouldn't see anything here, right? If we don't have the on change, let's say, let's remove this. Now let's say, see, I'm trying to type it. You see nothing, right? You see nothing. I'm trying to type it. Right?
It does not display.
Yes, because yeah, that's a function. So if this element is getting an input, and if I type A and B, that means initially it was A, now added B, and then now if I type C, so A and B has been spreaded, and now I'm adding C to it. So that's what's happening here.
what if you also comment the value property, like everything on chains and the value as well?
Okay, so that's an input. I can still do this. I can send, but it's not going to send because we don't have this on our state.
Okay.
Because whenever we click it, we get that from the state, right? We get the to do from the input value, right? We are pushing that input value to our to do. That's why. Okay, so let's try to change this functional component, class component, to a functional component, right? First thing you see, what do you see? First thing, you see state, right? You see state. How many state do you see? You see 2 state, right? One is for to do, one is for input value, right? There are 2 states. So I'll create here, I'll say const app. I'll do this. I'll keep everything for now. And then I saw that I have 2 different states. So I'll say const to-dos set to-dos use state. Initially, it's an empty array, right? And then I'm going to say const input value set input value, and I'm going to say use state, and initially it's empty string, right? Okay, so I don't need this, right? This is doing the same thing as this, right? Straightforward. This is only boilerplate. Like whenever you write this extends React component, these are syntax. Constructor, super, syntax. We don't need render because on functional component we return something directly. We don't need this. This is from render. Now we need to use this, right? So you see, this is referencing the state, right? This dot state. We are updating from that. Here we don't need this state to map the to do. We are mapping the to dos. We got the to dos. We got the to dos. Okay, and then the value of input value is input value, whatever we input. Here we don't need this. We can say on change. So set input value, because this is input, right? We are targeting input. So this can be, this dot state can be input value. And then we don't need this, I think. Set input value to e dot target dot value. This should do it. Okay, set to do. Whenever we click, we want to set to do to be this dot state dot input value. We also want set input value to be empty. Value to be empty. Okay, let's see. We don't need this dot state. Input value. Okay. Let's see. Do we have any problem? Okay, we still got the element. We removed this keyword. Let's try to write something. Add. Okay, we have an issue here. Todos.map is not a function. Okay. Todos is an object. Okay. Let's see. It's an empty object. No, it's an array. Array of any. Define callback function. Let's see. Okay, the value is going to be an input value. Input value, whenever we write here, it's going to set that input value to e dot target dot value. Whenever we click it, our to do is going to be whatever we have on our input value, and then we are going to set it as empty. Our only problem is here, right? We are trying to map through the to do. Do you guys remember when we tried to map over an array? We can say map over an array, right? Yes.
It returns an array.
Sorry.
On your map,
Array dot map array. Initially, it's empty. Where did it go? 1 second. Okay, initially it's empty. It's an empty array. We are trying to map through that array and trying to give it an index. We are giving it as a key, but whenever we type and send, todos.map is not a function. Yeah, you'll often run into problems like this, and then you have to talk through it, right? Whenever you are coding, you have to talk through it. If you just be quiet and if you just try to solve this, it's not going to be ideal. They are going to want to see like how do you solve a problem. So just talk through it. And sometimes they'll let you Google, right? They'll let you Google. I had like 3 or 4 interviews. They are like, hey, can you write something? And then they'll say, hey, you can use documentation. That means like you can Google, right? So why it is not a function? Todos.map is not a function. Any guess? Any ideas?
Seems like to-dos. To-dos is not an array at all, but it is an array.
It is an array. We have it as an empty array. And what we're doing is whenever we click a button, we are setting that to do, set to do, and we are setting that to do to be an input value.
Can you use chat GPT instead of Google?
We can now, but in interview, no. Let's see. Let's see.
Once you get the exact answer, what to wonder about.
You got it. What might be the problem here? Oh, let's see. Map. It's an array. Array.maps would kind of work, but let's see. We have an element and an index. Arrow function, core function. Key array using attribute like okay. Key and object. To map key and a value, key with a value. If it is a number, but our to do is going to be something like this, right? To do's is going to be, let's say, first to do, second. This is what it's going to be. We just have to map through it. Everything is working. It's only this part of the code that is not working. And it's saying to-do.map is not a function. Why is it not a function? Index is just a number. It's trying to get it unique. To is to do. Any ideas? Anything that you can find something being wrong with this?
It is. Can we actually like console log the to-dos?
Yeah.
And actually see its type.
Yes. To do's. Wait. Or we can say type of to do's. It's an object. It's an object.
So we need to convert it to array, right? So
if we put it as an object, yeah, it's an object. But we can map through an object, right? Map through an object. We have something called object.entries. So if we try to do object.entries of to-dos, can you do this? And say, we can do this, right? But there is one more problem. Okay, no problem. Object.entries converts our object into an array, and then we are mapping that to do. So let's say, hey, oh, it's mapping with a key. Index of 0 is H, index of 1 is E, and index of 2 is Y. But we don't need the index. 1 second. Let's see.
That happening on line 29.
Let's see, line 29. This is just a key. We use key just to know that, hey, it's unique, right? We are not printing the index, right? We are only printing the to do, right? But we are getting the index here. So well, let's see, 1 second. I'll console log console.log object.entries of to-dos. Let's see. Okay, currently say hey, in an item. Okay, we have array of 1. Okay, that's a problem. So it's saying it's storing each item we type, it's storing it. That means if you remember, we were spreading and then we are adding an input value, right? Maybe we can do that. Maybe we can do that. So on change, we are setting the state, we are spreading the initial value, and then we are adding one more, right? So can we say dot input value, comma, target value? Can we say that? Let's see. Hey, oh, I'm spreading. What's the issue? Oh, it's an object. Item, that's input value. No. Anything? Let's see. Okay. If I do this, I do this, I would say, hey, oh, I can spread it. Okay, there's an issue. What can we do?
And it is how about we like initialize the state but with an empty string?
We want to do it with, it's an empty string, yes.
I mean, like in the user state for the to-dos, we have an empty array, but like how about we put an empty string inside that array?
Here?
Yes.
Okay, that's one. It's indexing each and every one.
Yes, and now like what if we
Yeah.
remove the object or entries and like do to-dos.map, treat it as an array?
Okay, let's see. Nope, because it's an object, right? To do is an object, right? It's going to store everything like this, right? Even if we have initially, even if we have to do's equals to empty, whenever we run set to do, then it's going to update it, right? Like this, it's going to add, right? Initial, this would be the initial, and this would be like after updating, right? Updating. So I know the issue is with here, like whenever we are running an onChange function, let's take this out and say handle change. Let's create another function called handle change that is going to take an event, and then it's going to let's say initially it's input value, const input val equals to input value, and then can we append value to an empty object. Key value pairs. It's an empty object. Sorry?
Is it push?
We could push, yes. And then we're going to call set input value. This is going to be this value, and then it has to be target value, right? But let's see. Yeah, no. Yeah, something's here. 1 second. So this is okay. I think we have to do this with this as well. This is going to be initial to-dos and then going to be input value. So no, Yeah. Yeah, that's the only issue that we have here. Yep, that's the only issue. But let's see. Let's look at this one again. We have an empty object. We have an input value. Okay, I think I know what it is. We are using one single state to update everything, right? Let's see. To do, set to do. To do is going to take something called to do, which is an empty object, and then going to take input value, which is an empty string. Now we can spread, right? Now we can spread this, I think. Here, let's say set to do's. This is the value, so we are going to input value. This is going to be this, and then also we are going to say input value. This is going to be the target value, right? Because okay, 1 second. We still need the to-dos. We want the input value to be. Let's see. Okay, this dot state. State. We are doing this. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Set to do's is going to be to do's. We want this. We want this state. Yeah, something like this. And then we want input to be the targeted value, but this is an array. That's why we had problem here. Object of entries. Right now we can map through it through to-dos. Won't be an issue. It's inside an array. To do. Let's see. Set to do. To do is going to be to do's. Same to do's. Same state. Only change the input value state. Take the input value. To-dos dot input value would be that, and to-dos and to-dos. How do we spread this? If we do this, we don't need to-dos. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, now we are spreading the initial to-dos, which is this, and now we are only updating input value on change, right? Now this input value is going to be to-dos dot input value. Whenever we are trying to set the to-dos, we want the input. Let's see. We want the to-do to update, right? So this is going to be on click. What do we want to do on click? Let's see. We want the same to-dos, but inside of to-dos, we want to update the input value. Okay, set to-dos, same thing here. We want the same to-dos, but we want to update the input value. Input value to be e.target.value, right? Takes an event. Now we have this. Again, it's not a function. What's the issue? State.todos.map. Come on. To-dos dot to-do dot map, right? Because we are coming inside to-do and then we're mapping. But again, to-do is an object. So let's see. Nothing on click. we are setting to-dos. We want the to-dos, 1 second. What do you want to update? Set update to-dos, to-dos dot to-do to be, yeah, something like this. We want to do to be, let's see, to do is an object. There's any ideas on change, on click? We are setting the state for to-dos. Okay. So setting the state.
Let's paste all codes into GPT chat. It will do by all.
But you can do that at whenever you are interviewing, right? We want to spread the existing to do, and we want to input value. This dot state or input value. We just want to update the input value. So let's see. This is basically the only code that we need. Set to do. Let's see. We don't need this dot state. We don't need this dot state. But input value is going to be to-dos dot input value. Let's see. Yep, there's an issue. To do. Okay. This is going to be entries to do. This is the state to do's. We are mapping that to do. To do is stop to do. Okay. Convert undefined or null. Oh man. Yeah, what I'm gonna do is like I'm going to send the link to this file, so you guys can figure something out. What's wrong with it? Play with it.
Nitish, I also found a link where where we could probably use the solution that you were using, like using use state to initialize a state with an empty array, but like rather than using an empty array, that user is initializing the array like somewhere above, and like let's say const empty array equals like the square braces, and while using
like this, let's say to do items equals to, and then to do is this.
Actually no, like just like the straight up empty array, like const to do items equals like the square braces, and then like while we use state, like as you were doing in the previous try,
previously, individually.
Yes, individually, like creating two states using use state, different use state hooks, and then instead of like putting an empty braces inside use state, passing the variable.
That's still, it is still going to be the same thing, right? The initial value, because we are just updating that. Again, we have to call the set to do's. Right now, our on change is working, right? This is working fine. Whenever we are clicking on change, we are spreading the initial to do's. We are only changing input value, which is the EDA targeted value. So that's why we have this. Our only problem is with this, but here let me extract to handle click. takes an event which is a click, and let's say let's move this to here, and so we can on click I can call and then click. The only thing we need to do is we need to add into that object, right? Add an item into that array inside of to do object. So here to do is going to still be any to do that was before, which is to do's dot to do, right? So this is what this dot state dot to do was doing, right? So this dot state dot to do means like they are calling this to do, spreading this to do. If we have any kind of even if we have empty, they are calling this, and then they are adding input value to it, right? They are updating the input value, which is okay, I think, which is what we are trying to do, because input value is changing based on e.target.value on change. So we are just trying to add it inside of this object. And then we are setting the input value as empty. After we set to do, after we do this, and then we are changing it into empty. We do this, cannot convert undefined or null to an object. Currently it's undefined or null. Okay, but this shouldn't have been an issue, but I don't know why. This is not an object because this is not, you can map through an object without using object.entries. Yeah, one sec. You have to-dos has to do, so to-dos dot to do, and then inside we are trying to map it. Yeah, the issue is again with this. Issue is right here because I'm pretty sure this should work because we are spreading existing to do, but we are only trying to update. Yeah, we are trying to add input value to that object. So let's see. I'm quite confident the problem is here, only here, just because it's an object again, but we can't use object.entries. We should be able to write entries because that's an object. This is an object, but it's undefined or null. Why is it null? It's empty, but let's give it an empty array. It becomes null. Why does it become null? We have an event. Why do we need an event? If we have, can we take an event and can we say e.target.value? Because that's still the input value, right? No, why is it null? Yeah, what you guys can do is you can play around with it, kind of figure this out. If you don't figure it out, that's fine. I'll look into it. I'll see what the problem is, and then I'll probably post it on the group, right? Yeah, but other than that, like you guys saw, like these kind of questions are typically comes up in the interview. Even though sometimes you are not able to answer one or two questions, it doesn't really matter. They try to look into your thought process. How do you like work on a problem? For example, here we converted the class component into a functional component. We used hooks. We removed this state from everywhere. We removed the render, and then we used the functional component lifecycle, which was like use state which runs through component did mount. Right now here component did mount would be constructor, and then this render is again another lifecycle methods. But here, as soon as we have return, it automatically runs this life cycle before return. That means when it comes here, we don't need to type render, right? And then it goes through this, and then yeah, that's basically it. Sometimes like you are not able to like actually solve some problems. I had one instance. I was interviewing with Caterpillar. They had 9 tasks, and they gave me this rarely happens. It was a 3-hour interview.
There's one Fury Cat. You don't know, right? Caterpillar.
Yeah, Caterpillar is.
Yeah, it's 3 hours
Yeah.
right from here.
Yeah, it's this company.
Yeah, I know what it is.
Yeah. So they gave me this tasks. I had to solve 9 different tasks. They gave me 3 hours. I was able to solve only 2, to be honest. And then they told me like, hey, like, yeah, you can take the tasks home. You can do it and send us by the end of the week. And then I did that. Although I didn't hear from them, but like that sometimes happens. So I think this was my solution back then. But yeah, now it's removed.
Can you not call them to hear? Okay, I need feedback from my interview. Yeah.
I did. The recruiter kind of ghosted me, and then once I signed with TribalScale, which is the current company that I work for. After I signed them, they called me back. They say like, hey, we are still interested. I said like, hey, I already signed in for the job, and then that's where the conversation went. But sometimes they reach out to you. I had this person recruiter that reached out to me after a year. It was for a client. It was financial company. She basically called me up a few weeks back and say, hey, like, are you still in the market? And then I'd say, yeah, like, I'd be happy to interview. And then we are kind of setting up an interview. So this happens even if you get rejected for the first time, the recruiter still keeps your resume and then calls you back whenever they have any position available. So that happens. That happened to me. That happens to everyone. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll share this link with you guys. I'll probably forget because this guy was my interviewer that interviewed me, so I didn't want to make any changes to his file. So for it, but like yeah, just look through this problem, try to figure it out what's wrong with it, and then try to play around it, and then you guys will be able to like expect, like these are the things that we expect on a technical interview, right? I'll post this. I'll create another file called class component.js. I'll dump the main code here, class component.js. So you can render it here and try to change this class component. Maybe solve this issue as well. Like there are different ways of handling it, but right now I don't think we have that time to like brainstorm or go through the problem. I'll also share this. This was basically like I was preparing for myself. I just wrote about something like a prompt, because this is every time a recruiter calls you, they're going to be like, hey, tell me about yourself. Tell me about the current project that you are working on, which is based on your resume. And then they're also going to talk about, hey, like, do you know about these technologies? Are you an individual contributor or a tech lead? We are an individual contributor. Tech lead is someone who is leading a team. And then we work under a tech lead, right? And then there are some technical terms. This is what I did for my resume, because I had these terms. I have been using this technology, but I still wanted to be like, whenever somebody asks me about it, I wanted to be fluent and like be able to tell them, hey, like I use this technology, for example, TypeScript. If somebody asks, hey, I saw you working with TypeScript, can you tell me a little bit more about it? I should be able to say, hey, like TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, but it basically does this, and then I'm very comfortable working with TypeScript, right? So that's why I'm that's what I did. You guys can do this for your own resume. Whatever technology that you use, make a list of those main technology, write about what it does, so that whenever recruiter calls you, you don't get side distracted, or like you don't get confused or anything. But yeah, I'll share this document as well. These are basically some of the interview questions that I was asked. You guys can go through it. You guys can also I would highly recommend this React. So this repo, try to like start it, like fork it, anything. Like every question that we went through is here, right? What is the state in React? What is the features of React? Why do is reference? What is virtual DOM? You go here. It kind of explains it properly with representation, how it actually talks about virtual DOM, real DOM, and then you can talk about this, right? When somebody say, hey, why do you prefer React? Like you can give them this reason, right? And then difference between shadow DOM, virtual DOM, like basically everything. This is like bread and butter for a React interview. So just be prepared. Like even though you are doing projects, even though you are currently learning, just go through it like once a while, just to keep your memory fresh, right? One of the recent interview I had, the same interview that I'm currently doing the final round, which is the fifth round, is let's see, my first round was second round. He told me to create a component. Basically, I created a component like this app, returned something, and then I returned hello world, right? And then he told me, hey, like create another component, right? And then I did like const app2 return app1 app2, and then he told me, now make your app is a parent component and nest child component inside of it, right? So that means, hey, call app2 here, right? That means this. This was my second round of interview, right? So
maybe the difficulty level of the question they ask based on your number of years of experience you put in your resume. So how many years of experience you listed?
I have like currently like 3 to 5 years of experience. Okay. I'm not a senior, so like I'm like mid-level, or like not like super senior. It's like mid-level, like even the intro, if you go into like 1 or 2 years of experience, the questions are going to be the same. So when they ask you to write a component, they are seeing like, hey, do you know functional component? Can you write a component in React? Like they are trying to assess this on that basis. And then when they say, hey, like make this a parent component, make this a child component, like are you aware about those terminologies, right? Like now when they say, hey, like make this a parent component and make this a child component and render them, then that means like, hey, I just need to call this component here. That means this is going to be a child of this component, right? So pretty basic, but still like look through those small things in React, like just revise even hooks. Interviews are not going to be super complex. It's going to be, they're just going to test you based on your knowledge, like how well you know React, like even the small things like this. So yeah, like just practice, and you guys should be good. Yeah, like just I'd say practice. I'll also share this, which is bunch of questions, right? Just questions. It's about CSS, HTML. This is about JavaScript, and then JavaScript general, which is like, hey, what is a functional programming? What is inheritance? What is prototypal inheritance? Sometimes you might be, sometimes your job requirement might say, hey, we need a full stack developer. That means they might ask you about Node. Again, it's JavaScript. not super necessary, but for React, at least like look into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript questions, because whenever you walk into a React interview, they will ask you about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So I'll share this as well. Copy link. So just go through this and then practice, but like this is gold. This is a gold mine for React interview. If you walk into an interview and then you are well prepared just from this, you'll ace like 3 or 4 rounds of interview, easy.
Then you go to job, you get paid, and you start learning, right? Paid to learn.
Like yes. So honestly, is it recorded? It's recorded. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, like right now I'm working with HubSpot, which is HubSpot is a marketing tool. Yeah. So I am a React developer, but my company website, everything is stored with HubSpot. So I like right now this week I'm learning HubSpot before I start to work on it. So they'll give you time, they'll give you resources, they'll tell you like, hey, we are going to use this technology, maybe this documentation is helpful, maybe look into this documentation. So you don't have to be scared, like you don't expect to walk in and just start working. It doesn't work like that. You walk in, it took me a month just to understand the code base. I had to play around it, I had to ask so many people. I had to reach out to like yesterday I had to reach out to someone who previously worked on this website using HubSpot, and then that guy came onto a call, and then he gave me an overview of how HubSpot works, and then I started going on creating my own simple project on HubSpot, and that's how we basically learn, right? So at your job, like even if you create your own project on the same technology because you are learning that technology, it is fine, they'll still pay you. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's what I like about paid to learn rather than just you will never be confident on any of this.
Yeah, so like this is all about learning, right? Because React, like when I joined the workforce, React was we were using React 17, and then my company React 18 came out when I was working on March 29. I joined. I started working from March 21st. On I think it was on October, my company decided, hey, we are going to move from React 17 to 18, right? So I was a part of changing React 17 to 18 on the code base. So I had to go through all this documentation, look into this documentation, create my own simple project with React 17, and then change it to React 18, and then I go to my company code base and then convert from 17 to 18. So it's all about learning. So everybody will be fine with it. Nobody is going to pressure you because everybody is learning, because these technology keeps changing all the time. Right now we are using React 18. Maybe few months from now there will be React 19, right, with some new features, and then again we have to upgrade it. So everybody is learning. So
cool, thank you.
Also use beta.reactjs.org for documentation. This is the latest one. They don't update this one. If you go to documentation, they don't update this one. This is old. So if you go here, if you see examples, it's going to be class components. Going to beta.reactjs.org. This is Learn React, 99% finished. So this is updated.
Beta.
So here you have all of the hooks. So these are updated, right? Use effect. They'll give you updated examples. But if we go into just React and documentation, it's outdated. This is updated. So. All right. If you guys have any questions, concerns, let me know. Otherwise, I think we can end the session. I think I went a little bit overhead, but yeah. Do you guys find this kind of session helpful, happening once a while?
I like this kind of rather than rigorous coding.
Cool. Yeah. At least it helps you prepare, like revisit some of the topics and then just be.
Yeah, if you crack interview and you get
Yeah.
hired, you will have some months of time to prepare. No company puts you everything on your head right away. You just
Yeah.
can figure that out.
Yeah. Even yeah, when I started working for NFL, they used something called X-State, right? It's a state management, like context API, like Redux. This is to manage state. I had no idea how to use it, right? So just went through documentation, talk with people, look at the code base, how other people had written the code in X-State, followed that pattern, and then that's how I was able to like learn X-State. It took me about 5 months just to be comfortable working with X-State after I was being hired.
Yeah.
So,
See,
yeah.
yeah, getting paid while you're learning. That's a fun part of going to the job.
Yeah, this industry is all about learning. So
yeah.
Cool. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to ping me. But yeah, I think that's for today.
Thank you for your experience. These kind of conversation helps a lot to boost our confidence and to motivate us to work on it further. Though coding is always a difficult. You need to practice, and we don't have limited. We have very limited time to work on it. Of course.
Yeah, that's completely fine. At least you know what to expect. So
yeah, yep.
Yeah. All right. Nidhusa, are we good to end the session or?
Yes, sure, Nitish.
Okay. All right, guys. Practice. If you had any questions, just ping me. Even if I don't, if I won't be able to reply, I'll probably see it and get back to you soon. Right.
Thank you.
Good luck, Nitish, for the interview.
Yeah, good luck
Thank
with the interview. Next interview.
I'll probably bomb it.
Get 160.
All right.
160 a year. Okay, good.
All right. Good night, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitish. Good night, everyone.
Right. Bye-bye.